Hello and welcome to yet another Tech Talk here at bestofhighend.com. Joining us today is Bruno Putzijs. Welcome, Bruno.
Thank you.
We'll be having some Tech Talks about Class D amplifiers. We'll do a little triology. Let's start with the past, the now, and then the future. So, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Class D amplification?
Well, I think many people think Class D is a particularly recent thing. If you start digging a bit deeper, it's not. The first patent that I could find, or the first documented Class D amplifier that I could find, dates from 1930.
Oh.
By a fellow called Bernice Bedford, and he's generally known as a hero in power electronics in general. So with this particular patent, essentially he invented pulse width modulation, and the patent shows a circuit with two power triodes that are being driven into saturation by the sum of a triangle wave and an audio signal. So the power valves were actually acting both as a comparator and as a power stage, and you had a separate oscillator which produced a square wave, which was then turned into a triangle wave with a capacitor, and then you had and then the audio signal was added to that. So that concept already contained sort of all the classic parts of what I sometimes call the school book Class D amplifier. Mm-hmm. Which is an oscillator and a comparator and a power stage and a low pass filter. And Bedford was clearly not your average armchair inventor, because that single picture that is shown in the in first page of the patent, sort of outlining the idea, also shows a couple of oscilloscope graphs, and it includes tiny little details like overshoot in the switching waveform, and like the little residual ripple that you see on the low, riding on top of the low frequency signal, that wouldn't have been there if you hadn't actually built the thing and seen the signals on the scope. So yes, Class D goes back an awful long time.
But that's almost like 100 years ago, then.
Well, very nearly, yes.
Oh my God!
But you have to but keep in mind, the idea then was not necessarily to drive a loudspeaker with it. The most common usage of this type of Class D amplifier was actually in radio transmitters. Mm. An amplitude modulated transmitter is essentially an amplifier driven by a constant carrier, and the amplitude modulation is then done by modulating the power supply voltage to that big amplifier, to the radio frequency amplifier, with a low frequency signal, which is your audio signal. Mm-hmm. And so what you would often have is you would have big power amplifiers, sometimes a Class A B amplifier, but also sometimes a Class D amplifier that provided the anode modulation signal, and at that point you're looking at well, let's say current levels, which we think are normal, like 40 amps, but 70,000 volts. Because these transmitters were absolutely big. So the stuff that was happening in the 30s, the rapidity with which, in particular, radio technology was evolving around that time is just absolutely staggering. And then otherwise PWM was very quickly used for things like motor control and welding and whatnot. But not so much actually driving loudspeakers, because mm-hmm. I think that's when we should jump forward by about 30 years, and when we see sort of first people experimenting with transistor based Class D amplifiers for loudspeakers. So you probably recall this little 5-watt Sinclair kit that was a simple self-oscillating Class D amplifier, and you had John Ulrich, who had started Infinity, which then later he kept building amplifiers under the brand name Spectron.
Mm-hmm.
In the UK. You had. That's why I brought my computer, because I'm so bad at remembering names. It's deeply embarrassing, but
it's almost a history lesson, so we don't mind.
Exactly, it's Brian Atwood.
Okay.
He's probably best known for a seminal paper that he wrote in 1984, where he analysed in quite some detail the distortion mechanisms in a Class D amplifier and presented a workable circuit. And his amplifiers were sold under the PV brand, so typical Live Sound Pro audio kind of equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand the rest of the of this three, I have to take you back to Bedford's initial idea. As I said, I call it the schoolbook amplifier,
mm-hmm.
because when you read a magazine article about Class D amplifiers, the first thing that article will do is it'll show the comparator, the power stage, and the triangle wave generator, and the input signal,
yeah,
and of course the low pass filter, and conceptually it's good to break it down in those parts, but it's not awfully helpful, because I remember Brian Atwood once explaining to me that he was more than happy to help people construct construct the tri-wave generator and all the way to the power stage and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to closing a feedback loop around the amplifier, it was he said, well, that's still a bit of a black art, and I have to admit that until the late 90s it very much was, the shocking thing was that I later found that that it's fundamentally difficult to put a feedback loop around the schoolbook amplifier with its separate oscillator. Well, we're both audiophiles, so we know that there's a thing about feedback in our world, and when you think back, actually, back in the 60s, when most amplifiers were valve amplifiers, feedback was used widely and successfully, and no one batted an eyelid. Mm-hmm. So feedback only got its bad reputation in the 70s with the first transistor amplifiers.
Yeah.
And they had a shortcoming, which was actually not the feedback loop, but which was the input stage, which was supposed to subtract the input signal from the feedback signal, and that could cause distortion. And you could even though sort of the person who first who first popularized who first explained what the problem was, Matti Otala from Finland, in that very first paper, he actually explained what the cause was, and that it was the input stage, and so that should have been enough for people to realize that, okay, actually feedback is not the problem. You just have to figure out a way of making that input stage operate a bit better, and it's fairly straightforward. But
mm-hmm.
but that didn't filter through in the collective consciousness of music lovers. and as a result, I mean, I'm making this detour around Class AB amplifiers for a reason. I will get back on track. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Is that then people would often do experiments like you take an amplifier, you just without feedback, and then you put feedback around it, and very often the results weren't good at all. And there seems to be some sort of a fundamental law in amplifier building, is that if you take an amplifier which functions reasonably well without feedback, it probably will not function at all well if you try and put feedback around it, because the same thing that actually allows you to use it without feedback, which is the fact that it's got a bandwidth past the audio band, and then whatever may happen afterwards is fine. That actually keeps you from closing the loop. And the very same thing actually happened with the schoolbook amplifier. The schoolbook amplifier is hobbled by the output filter, and so you could try and close a loop around it, and it would sort of function with it when you have a particular loudspeaker connected, and you disconnect the loudspeaker and the whole thing blows up. That's that sort of thing, and so quite seriously troubling things. So what I'm saying is that there's actually a connection there. Is that because the schoolbook amplifier is fundamentally a non-feedback amplifier that functions acceptably well as an audio amplifier, at least produces recognizable sound and sometimes even enjoyable. But you can't move the art any further with that that concept.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing which kind of held up development throughout, I think, the 80s and the 90s was that bloody letter D. You know, I mean, I've already been talking about Class A amplifiers, Class B amplifiers, Class C amplifiers. I've already mentioned, not by name, but the RF output stage in an AM transmitter was a Class C amplifier, and Class D was just the next letter up in the alphabet.
Yeah.
But people got confused because the output stage operates in a binary fashion, which is often sort of associated with digital operation. So people call it digital amplifiers, and in some technical lexicons in certain languages, you don't even you don't even have a word Class D. For instance, the Germans literally call it Digitalverstärker. You just look it up on Wikipedia. The Klasse D doesn't actually exist there. And the same thing in Japanese. They call it digital rampu, which is like digital amplifier, of course. And that's that. And so it became almost logical to try and convert a digital audio signal into a PWM signal using only digital means, and then amplify that with a pair of MOSFETs and then low pass filter. It's kind of it is deceptively simple. It's which is kind of the problem, because I say it has a high PowerPoint appeal, because you wouldn't believe just how many companies visited me in the 90s, showing slideshow presentations of their new amplifier. And invariably, it was a non-feedback digital input amplifier, and that was just because it was easy for a product manager to understand how it is supposed to work, but a lot harder to understand the different ways in which it does not work well.
Yeah.
And because all of these things are actually purely analog in nature. Sort of most famous analog distortion type in a Class D amplifier is that you turn a MOSFET on. That doesn't happen instantaneously. You have to turn one off. You turn the other on. Meanwhile, and there's a transition. and the exact time when the voltage goes from negative to positive or vice versa depends heavily on the output current, and even with a fast modern output stage, you will easily get a timing error which is about 1% of the whole length of the switching cycle. So that was so all those things, that and the output filter and so on, that was swept under the carpet because it was because it was so deceptively simple.
Yeah.
And so a lot of research time has gone into designing the ultimate digital PWM modulator.
Yeah.
And at some point, I really felt that these researchers were simply trying to delay the moment that they actually had that the rubber had to hit the road, and that they actually had to connect it to a power stage and then be confronted with everything else that was going to happen. And what happened next is that let's say a completely different conception of a Class D amplifier from the schoolbook amplifier started becoming more popular. I already mentioned Sinclair. They use a self-oscillating amplifier. It's an amplifier that actually doesn't need an oscillator. It oscillates by dint of a feedback loop, and it's just designed to be literally unstable, but in precisely the way that you want it to be unstable. And meanwhile, sort of on average, it also processes the audio signal. I recall, for instance, Ice Power. They started in the 90s. Their amplifiers were self-oscillating. That was actually because Carsten Nielsen had a doctoral student who was working on a Class D amplifier, and it was a schoolbook type amplifier with feedback around it. And then one day the student forgot to turn on the oscillator and turned the amplifier on, and all of a sudden distortion was much better than before. Oh, that was interesting. So that was actually sort of one of the first mass market self-oscillating Class D amplifiers.
It was a eureka moment.
It
A small one.
Yes, it actually was. And in my case, I'd always been wondering, like, can I actually not use the output filter as part of that self-oscillating loop? And in 2000 or 2001, the penny dropped, and I invented something called the UCD. I'm very often credited with having invented the global loop self-oscillating amplifier. So Philips took out a patent, and that enormously upset another fellow who I shan't name. He ran a small consultancy with Class D amplifiers, and he was just he was horrified that such a simple circuit that worked so well could be patented by someone. He said it's too simple to patent. I mean, not that he'd come up with it, but there you go. So he went looking, and he unearthed a patent from 1973, which described almost exactly the circuit that I'd invented. So it's a classic case of that inventions are often invented twice. First by someone who was just way ahead of his time. He was called Sturgeon, by the way, the inventor, and then reinvented by independently decades later when the time is right, and then that second person suddenly becomes famous for having invented this circuit. But I cannot accept that because it was Sturgeon who came up with it in the early 70s. It's an amplifier. It has only a comparator, an output stage, low pass filter, and a feedback circuit, no clock. It is completely load stable, so with or without speaker, the response of the amplifier is the same. Those advantages were clearly mentioned in his patent.
Yeah.
And it was only because it was so different from the schoolbook amplifier that it was largely ignored by everyone else. I mean, just imagine, suppose that thing had been picked up at the time it was invented. The whole Class D revolution that is now roundabout now, I think the Class D revolution is over. Class D is accepted and it functions fantastically well. And there are few people who actually deny that. Certainly not people who've actually heard them. That could have been over and done with in the mid-90s. And we would have had none of this detour via digital amplification and whatnot. It would have been an established and completely finished technology by then. I mean, I've had fun designing these things myself, but I'm quite sure I could have found something else that was worth doing.
Well, that's quite a history lesson to imagine that we almost go back 100 years.
Yeah.
When the little seed was planted, and then as you say, a lot of time was lost looking at the wrong directions, and then a little eureka moment when doing something wrong, you notice that actually you get a better result. That's strange things happening.
Yeah. Fortunately, in my case, I was actually driving towards. So for me, it was not an accident, but I think. For many people, it was, and it's fine. I mean, as they say, serendipity favors a prepared mind.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that quite wraps up our little history lesson. So viewers, there you have it. This was our tech talk about the history, the past, if you will, about Class D amplification. In the next episode, we'll talk about today, the now. But that's for the next one.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us now, and bye-bye.